Annie Jones, nearly Dr. Annie Jones, but not quite. The journey's not quite there yet. But it's been my greatest pleasure to meet you on my own journey and to walk this kind of doctorate journey with you. Thank you so much for coming along for this interview today. With me. For those who haven't crossed paths with you before, how would you introduce yourself?
Well, I'm primarily a musician. So my first love is music. And I remember first playing the recorder when I was 5, and then learning the piano. I was taught by the vicar's wife at 6, 7, and then I moved into playing the oboe, and that's really been my love and my guiding light throughout my life. That started when I was 9, and the reason I chose the oboe is because I just loved the sound. So for me, that's very much sort of an existential focus of my life, has just been loving that sound, and that's led me to play with all sorts of amazing people, travel, join different groups, have all sorts of experiences through my music. So really, yeah, I'm a musician. I also love nature and countryside, have a deep focus in my life on spirituality and being with nature and self-development, really. So that's a big part of my life as well. And I also have 6 pets and 2 children. Yeah, so that's me.
Oh, amazing. And I'm so looking forward to this interview and to see how all of these incredible creative areas of your life kind of connect with each other, especially in kind of through the lens of existential ideas. So what led you towards exploring existentialism on top of all of these other areas of your life?
um I think it's always been there, to be honest. I just didn't know what it was. um and I've always had a real interest, as I said, in nature, and being drawn towards just being, what that means, and sort of noticing that I felt particularly calm and centered when I was walking my dogs or being in my garden, or even certain people, I would feel different around them. You know, I worked in corporate life for a long time, and that was very fast paced, very edgy, very sort of consumer driven and profit driven. And I really enjoyed it. But I did notice that in that, some people I naturally gelled with more than others. Some people I just couldn't quite relate to. So I think it's been there all the way through my life. My father grew up on a farm and was very much immersed in that world, a very unchanging world, in the East Sussex, where he would talk about, you know, not having electricity as a child, when horses were replaced by tractors. So he was really, and he was born in 1931. So he very much straddled that sort of, that the 2 eras of the pre-industrial farming life, with all those traditions that went back centuries, and then this more modern approach. And so I kind of was exposed to all of that through him, as he would talk about it. And we used to, I mean, I spent my whole life going to East Sussex and traveling there and seeing his old farm and all of that. So that's a deep part of who I am. And so then I think really coming to it, although it's always been there and I didn't necessarily realize what it was, after my youngest child reached, she was about 5, I realized that I wanted to do something more with my life. Now I didn't need to focus on my children so much. As they were getting older, I wanted to sort of put something in place that would guide me through the rest of my life. And so I've always known that I would be quite potentially good at being a psychologist or doing therapy. And I did a sort of career aptitude test when I was 22, and it came up, oh yeah, you'd be perfect for that. And I thought, well, I can't possibly do that. I don't have enough life experience. What would I possibly bring to that? But then in my 40s, I just thought, actually, this feels right. So then that led to a whole process of postgraduate study, and it naturally evolved very beautifully to finding myself at the NSPC, the Academy, 4 years ago. But it felt like a very organic process. So that's a sort of a quick summary of how I came to it.
Yeah, and you said there, you know, that you felt at the initial time that you hadn't had enough life experience, but what I really pick up on as you speak there is that it's not just your life experience which has influenced this journey, but also the life experiences of other people as well, like your father.
Yeah, completely. And I think that, you know, from a spiritual perspective, it's very much for me, it's, I just feel like I'm passing through and very much embodying, as we all are, all of our ancestors, and even those yet to come, that we're sort of in a relay race holding some kind of baton, but it's just transitory. And you know, sometimes I look in the mirror and I see my father's face or whatever, and I it's a real strong sense there of um not just sort of a DNA, but actually some kind of sense of spiritual or embodied beingness of him and others in my family, my grandmother as well. Very strong sense of her. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and have in your training so far, have you been exposed to a lot of insights into, because we often existential thinking, we think about our existence and probably society's existence, but in terms of that spiritual side of things and that ancestral side of things, is there some, is this come up in a lot in the literature or the teachings that you've understood?
Um, I wouldn't say so specifically. I think where it intersects is in the sense of rootedness of how we are in the world, what grounds us, and how we relate to the other.
Mm.
You know, so in the sense of, we could say that my or anybody's ancestral lineage is part of me, it's personal to me, and it's part of my inner world, and therefore it helps me, and I bring that to my relation with the outer world, with the spiritual. And then it's obviously, I think for me, the physical is the primary of the dimensions, the most important, because it's sort of the vehicle between the inner and outer. It's how we show up in the world tangibly. So that's really where I think it intersects.
You said that you, it had always been with you, but you didn't quite understand what it was. And so, do you feel that you understand it better now? How would you kind of define or describe existential ideas now?
Um, yeah, I think I do have a really deep understanding of, certainly not existentialism as such in terms of it being a definition, but actually how much more of a sense of the inner I have these days compared to when I was younger, where it was there, but it was almost invisible. So it's a bit like having a sort of, I don't know, an iceberg, and that's the self, and we're aware of this little bit that we show to the world. So we're very externally focused. Who can see me? What do I look like? How do I look physically? But actually all this depth, all this, the ancestral lineage, the any traumas, any pre-verbal, all of that stuff is hidden, and largely remains hidden for most people. So that's, I think that's really where I'm more familiar now with I would call it existentialism, in the sense of being with self. Is that.
Yeah, and it feels so kind of normal and obvious when we speak about it here now, to have the fact that we have all of these influences on our internal world. But as you mentioned there, some people struggle to, or even may never have that deeper insight and connection to what is essentially themselves. Why do you reckon people exist in this kind of disconnected way, in this more externally focused and less internally aware way?
I think it's partly how we value things as culturally and in society is we live in a very material world, don't we, that puts value on things like money, power, the sort of rise of celebrity culture. So that's all been part of our narrative for the last, I don't know, 20 years in particular. So I mean, I remember growing up in the 70s, it being quite different, because it was still in that era of a lot of clothes were homemade, food was largely, you know, home cooked, it was more seasonal. You couldn't just buy disposable fashion in the way that you can now. Ready meals didn't exist, all that sort of thing. So I think I've sort of been in at the tail end of that change. So I think it's all of that really. And also because there's a lot of denial. You know, who wants to know about their inner trauma or their sort of stuff that they'd rather forget about? There's a lot of that. I think, again, historically, women lost a lot of children often. You know, your chance of your child growing to adulthood was quite low. So that you had to get on with life because it was so practical. You had to get out there and survive and make sure there was food on the table. So there wasn't so much time to process pain. So I think that's also historically been where we're at. So in a way, where we are now, yes, we've got these celebrity cultures and all of that, which puts the focus on the outer. But in a way, we've got an opportunity to also look at our pain and our experiences and develop more of a sense of self, because we're more able to actualize. We're higher up the hierarchy of needs. We're not just focusing on food, shelter, water, all of that. We're in a slightly different place, which we're very lucky and fortunate.
Wow, yes, yeah. It's a really helpful way to understand it, and to understand the kind of the timeline of things and the history of things, and to kind of, at least as an offering of why we might be where we are now, and perhaps why these ideas and these spaces of reflecting and these spaces of understanding who we are, who we really are, who our roots are, can be so valuable in today's world.
Completely, yeah. I think it's really important for our children that we bring that to our relationship with them. There's so much tendency now to focus on screens. I find myself, you know, I can become obsessed with my phone very easily if I'm a bit bored or I'm looking for a distraction. It's another way of splitting off from ourselves, but we don't really realize it because we think it's part of us, it's our inner world, but it's really not. And I think it's really important that we one of the things I do with clients, it's that I think is really, really vital, is that learning to discern what's me and what's you. You know, where's the line? Where is that line? Is it permeable or not? What do I let in? What do I not let in? What do I take on from others, and what's me? What do I give away? All of that's really important, and plays into a question.
Yeah. And I really love that you mentioned of not just how it's important for society in today's world, but as a messages to pass down to the next generations and to the children. How have you done that for someone that might be watching this and thinking, yeah, that's a good point, but how can I share this with someone that's younger, or that hasn't had a life experience, or that isn't going to go and read the textbooks? How can people work with to share these ideas and these understandings with their children?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's obvious, the obvious one is sort of go on holiday and don't bring your phone sort of thing, but and that is really valid. But I think it's also about responsibility. So I think that, you know, it's not really about, if we try and sort of deny ourselves something, we just want it more, don't we? So if I go on holiday and I say, right, we're all leaving our phones behind, guess what? As soon as we get home, everyone's just going to be catching. So I try and focus more on saying, let's actually take responsibility for how we're being with this technology. and actually notice how it's affecting, you know, us, our dynamics with each other, or can we use it in a way that's positive, that's sharing information? So I think it's very different to take a photo or share something funny with somebody else and use it as a sort of modern day form of post sort of thing, communication, versus endless scrolling. So I think it's maybe about picking out the healthier parts of it, and then not using it as yet another form of denial and denial of responsibility.
Because responsibility is such a big theme in existential thinking, and it's often, perhaps most often, spoken about taking responsibility for our lives and for the development and creation of ourselves. But
Mm-hmm.
here you remind me, or you present that it's also about taking responsibility for an awareness of where we are situated, the cultures that we're situated in, the era. We're in this massive technology era, and we need to
Yeah.
be responsible for the influence that that has on our lives and on the lives of other people.
Yeah, completely. And I think, you know, it's very easy to become a sort of almost a flat earther, you know, denying it. We shouldn't have it. Let's get rid of it all. Let's go back to, you know, but actually it's here. It's not going away. So it's actually about being with it, isn't it, in a way that's healthy. And it can be great fun. It can be hugely valuable. And we're in a way, we've never been more connected, but we've also never been more disconnected. And that's the sort of dance, as you say, from an existential perspective, of that sort of integration of the new into the self, and how that shows up in a way that's not toxic,
Mm-hmm.
that's positive, and is a source of growth.
I really love that you describe it as a dance, because I think it's very easy. I think, like you've just said, that to do either or. Like, technology is the best thing in the whole world, or technology is evil, or same as anything. We do this love or hate kind of
Mm.
witnessing the world in this way. But indeed, it can be both. There is that holism there always in everything.
Yeah, completely. And again, this is like this actual polarity thing, this concept of black and white, love and hate. And actually, again, it's very split. It means that we deny all the grey in the middle, because we want to either demonize or idealize, and actually both of those are excessive, aren't they? So yeah, it's all about, for me, it's all about the grey. It's about the spectrum. The polarities are at the end, yes, but in a way, often with those polarities, they meet, don't they? Usually there's a meeting, so it's really a circle
Yeah.
rather than a black and white polarity. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you reckon that there have been times in your life when kind of getting involved with these existential ideas has helped your well-being, helped your being in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the catalysts for me to decide to sort of train as a therapist was actually after I had a very bad miscarriage about 7 years ago, and so um, it was a real shock, because prior to that, my experience of motherhood was very, I was very good at pregnancy. I was good at birth. I did it well. I felt like it was one of my things. And so then to have this miscarriage, I felt like a failure. And it was a very sudden experience. One minute I was in Cornwall on the beach having a nice holiday with my young family and my husband. The next minute we'd driven overnight back home because I was bleeding, and then literally the next day, hemorrhaging, operation, general anesthetic, no baby, waking up unable to stand or even reach the toast at the end of the bed because I'd lost so much blood. I literally had no strength. I just literally went from one day being one thing to the next day being this other, and it completely floored me. It just cut through every aspect of who I was, how I felt I was to everybody else in the world. You know, for example, to have to tell grandparents this had happened, I felt like a failure. But also spiritually, and it really shook my faith. I was like, how can this have happened? So it pushed me back on myself. And particularly as the age I was, I sort of thought, well, I'm probably not going to have any more children, because I was in my early 40s. I thought, well, this is probably it as well. So there was a sort of ending point, a forced ending about it. And so that really made me reflect on, who am I? What do I want to do with my life? And what gives me meaning in my life? Yes, I've got my beautiful family, my children, but they're going to grow up and they're going to leave home. And what's my personal meaning beyond that for me? And it came down to people that I love in my life. So just being with people I love, but also moving to more a place of service, giving. And that's where the sort of impulse to train as a therapist or a psychologist, whatever, came in, because I realized that was something I could do, which was sustaining and nurturing, would give me meaning, but it was also giving to other people, and that felt really important. So actually is a really deeply personal reason, and it was something that's led me. But the crazy thing is, the minute I made that decision, you know how some things just flow? It just, like, doors just like opened and flung themselves open in front of me, and I just walked through, and it was just incredible. So I really felt like, actually this is, and that although the miscarriage was very upsetting at one level, on another level I now feel it was absolutely like a signpost, like a transition point in my life. And that again is very existential, isn't it? Is seeing all sides and accepting what is, and being with something rather than railing against it for the rest of one's life. You know, that shouldn't have happened, oh my gosh, you know, all of that, sitting with that pain but also moving through it. So really a lesson in, actually, though we do have to move through these things, you can't just sort of not look at it or try and circumvent it. It doesn't work. You've got to just actually go through it, even if it's excruciating. And then when you get to the other side, there's often a lot of beauty to be found.
I really, really appreciate you sharing that so openly and honestly here, Annie, because I think we can learn so much from other people's experiences and their stories. And what I really, really resonate with as part of that story, and something that's coming up a lot for me in my thinking world, in my client work at the moment, is this sense of not resisting or following your own truth. And we can always tell what that truth is because it flows, doesn't it? We can
Exactly.
tell when we're pursuing something because other people think it's the right thing, or we've read about it and it's kind of cool, or oh, in the future it could make loads of money. But if having loads of money isn't in our value system, or having this or that isn't actually in our value system, we're gonna be met with resistance. Whereas when we're following something that is just totally right for us, things just tend to flow, don't they? And if they don't flow,
Absolutely.
it's usually a sign.
Yeah, and I think there's also that point of, you feel one, I think one, the more familiar we get, or one gets with that inner sense of knowing, the feeling in the body of if it's right for you, the
Mm.
more that you can tell, okay, even though for example something isn't happening right now, doesn't mean it's not going to in the future, or that you shouldn't keep trying because it feels right. So because sometimes the world isn't quite ready, but
Mm.
it just doesn't mean that in the future there'll be more alignment. And one of the most powerful practices I do now, which somebody, a really experienced trauma therapist taught me, actually, is she's a great friend, is actually, how many of us learn to discern what a yes and a no is in our inner selves. So often, working with clients, they haven't had a no because it's been overridden so much and abused, they didn't even know they have a no. Or they can't say yes because the idea of saying yes to something is too scary and frightening. So this is where you get then hover in this passive sort of frozen place of, wanting but not dare saying, or denying an impulse, or sort of, that sort of, I can't say no to this other thing that's come in, so now I'm being led in this other direction that's not really me. It's all quite subtle, but it leads to inauthenticity, as you say, and then it leads to tension. And so the practice is that you think of something that is a yes. Like, I don't know, for me it would be, do I love my children? Something like, there's absolutely a yes. And then close my eyes and just feel, what does that feel like in my body? And usually you feel that there's an expansion. There's something about it. There's a sort of heartfelt knowing of, yes, that's definitely landing as something really positive. And then think of something else that's definitely a no, whatever it is. It could be anything. And then you'll find that there'll usually be a contraction, or some kind of, you want to get away from that energy. You don't, it's not, and I use that a lot. And the more you do it, the more practiced one gets at it, the easier it is to discern. And so now, really, for me, for the last quite a few years now, I don't do anything unless it's very much based on that. So all of this training I've done I've led me there because of that sort of inner, does it feel right or not sense. And that's sort of how I go through my life.
It feels quite I don't know, is it sad, is it odd, or that something like this, connecting with your sense of yes or no, can be something that you learn so late in life. I mean, I have never been explained it in quite the coherent and explicit and tangible way that you have just described it to me. And yet it's so fundamental to be able to understand what is a yes for you and what is a no for you, and like you've said, furthermore, how to allow yourself to follow those.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I didn't do that before. So, for example, my music has very much been led by that, but to have that explained, and then to see the polarity of the difference as an exercise, is so powerful. And I use it with clients all the time, because actually, I don't think most of us do fall back on ourselves in terms of discerning that. We just sort of go through it, and we sort of, I don't know, we have different impulses that aren't authentic to who we are and what we want. So it's very much important to me that that's a sort of inner guiding light. Yeah.
Rather than an external guiding, like when you said we tend not to fall, or you don't think that we all fall back on ourselves. I realized that so many of us fall to others. So we're in a scenario and we're thinking, right, I think I know which direction, but I'm just going to double check with someone else,
I
and I'm
think
going
we
to
all
take
do
them.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all do it, because, it's very easy, isn't it? Somebody says, oh, I don't know, the classic is with friends. Some friends we love to see, but we don't see very often. Other friends we see more often because they just want to see us more. But we don't necessarily say, actually, I want to see this other friend, because they're not pushing and pressuring. So then you end up being led by an external agenda sometimes. I certainly noticed that on this doctoral training, where time's been very, very limited. It's been interesting to see where I'm being pulled to put my time, or even things like, I don't know, an opportunity to play in an orchestra, which I can't really do, because I had one example where it was in Guildford and it required driving there every night. And I did it 3 nights, and then I just thought, this is too much. I'm not going to do this. It doesn't feel right. It's actually too much. But even though I kind of wanted to do it, it wasn't really aligned with where I was at right now. So in the end, I got someone else to do it for me, and I just decided I would focus on my existing commitments. So yeah, I think it's really powerful.
And you're making me think of these notions of choice, and how we are, these yeses and these nos are always affiliated with a choice, and we are inevitably having to make choices. Even, it's so famously said that even not saying yes, or even not saying, oh, I'm not going to make a choice about this, someone else is going to make the choice. Well, actually that's still a choice. You're still choosing to seek someone else, and that's still your choice to not take responsibility for making that choice.
Completely. And I think it's also sort of, you know, we all know people who have big personalities who show up in the world and inhabit a lot of space, and other people who don't do that. And part of that is just innately who we are, but there's also opportunity for shifting around that. Is, you know, how much, if there's a finite amount of space, I always do this with my children, you know, at school. If there's someone being a bit of a billy, I just say, don't give it any oxygen. Otherwise, it's just going to get bigger. So actually, you know, come back to yourself, put the focus on yourself. What do you, where do you want to be in this? Don't give yourself away to the other just because there's an impulse there that's kind of calling, like a sort of siren call, wanting attention. Yeah. And it's quite powerful. I mean, it's really, with young people, I find that's a really interesting exercise, because like you say, and how often are we taught that? We're not taught this stuff in schools. We're not taught the basics of how do I feel in my body and what's a yes and what's a no. We're not taught that stuff. So unless it's explicitly spelled out to us, or we happen to be innately good at it just because we're in an environment which promotes that, which most family systems don't, because there's usually a more dominant figure or someone with a different, even if it's just siblings wanting to play with particular toys or something like that, you know, we're not often singled out and told, hey, look, how does this feel for you? It doesn't happen. We're taught about, you know, how to read and write and all of that sort of stuff, but it doesn't really, we're not really, there's no curriculum on emotional intelligence, is there, or embodiment, or what's your truth, or what makes you feel authentic, what brings you joy. I always say to my children, I don't care about your school reports, I just want you to do things which bring you joy, and as long as you're putting your all into that, that's enough. Which again partly feels awkward, because I know that lots of other people, I mean, my children are both at quite academic schools, and I know that that's almost going against the kind of culture, actually.
And I think that is, it's quite similar in the kind of, I guess, maybe mainstream academic way that existential ideas are taught, and they're often taught in quite a theoretical way, and maybe there are opportunities to practice that theory in practice, but it's all kind of guesswork, and there isn't a lot of tangible examples when we are reading only from the lens of existential ideas. And I think one of my favorite parts of encountering you on this journey is how diverse your kind of extracurricular interests and how are. I would love if you wanted to kind of for you to have the opportunity to kind of expand on some of the the avenues that you've looked into, which you find quite compatible with these philosophical thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the obvious ones is the shamanic stuff, the shamanic work, which I integrate quite often with my client work. And it there are parallels, you know, it's not directly exactly the same, but even the concepts of soul loss or soul retrieval are very similar to concepts of splitting and loss of self, of denial of self, that we come up against in existentialism. And it's all really about integration. So the idea of when I sort of have a new client, it's almost like looking at them as a sort of a vase or a beautiful piece of ceramic work, and actually where are the cracks, where are the pieces that are missing, what, how can we bring them into wholeness, and then make them really shine in the world. And there's that, I can't remember what it's called, the concept of the China, I think it's Japanese, isn't it, the healing of shattered ceramics with gold. Yeah, you know the one. And it's so beautiful, and that's really in shamanic work, it's a similar kind of process, although it's more sort of spiritually oriented. It's also very very quite raw and physical as well. So there are lots and lots of parallels, and I think that's what's so interesting, is that existentialism is sort of a word, but actually this stuff has been going on for thousands of years, really. This idea of being. I mean, you couldn't do anything other than be in the past, because that's all there was. You just were, and you either were looking for food, or you were sleeping, or you were being with others, or whatever, but that was how you were. So it's really interesting to look at that from a lens of existentialism, but also in that look at things like the nervous system and the I always look at clients and see, how are you regulated? Where's your nervous system, and how activated do you get? You know, are you triggered like that, or is there a gap? You know, it's kind of interesting. And one of the other areas that I'm really very passionate about is the pre-verbal, the early pre and perinatal psychotherapy piece, which is so powerful, and really, for me, all of those experiences we have in the womb, and when we're first born, and even the process of being born, all form imprints. You know, the way some say like a something like a snake or a reptile or whatever, their imprint, and birds do the same. So why would we not do that too, actually? And then we, in a way, that imprint informs how we experience our world, and how we live life, and how we process through meaningful events. You know, are we when we go to leave the house, do we always rush at the last minute, or are we always prepared and just walk out? You know, how are we with time? Do we feel it as a pressure, or is it something we're in sync with? You know, it's really interesting. And then often, if you look at a person's birth story, there'll be a parallel, which is amazing. So yeah, so that's another piece of actually a sort of a side sheet of existential work that's very embodied, and it's completely pre-verbal. It's not something we can verbalize and articulate and intellectualize. It just is a sense of knowing, inner knowing, and it's very subtle, but you only access it if you slow right down. So that to get there with a client, you literally start with just slowing the breathing down and mirroring the breathing, and really going to that place of, it has to be extremely slow and very gentle, and well paced and attuned, and then magic can be created. And for me, that's also for me that falls under the umbrella of existentialism.
The more I conduct this interview series, the more I realize how big that umbrella is, or can be.
Yeah,
Let's say we could
yeah.
say it's that big. It can be that big if you're open to it being that big. Yeah, and definitely that's something that I'm hoping that this can promote, is just how varied and vast it, and how things can be in harmony, different concepts can be in harmony with different philosophies, if you're just willing to kind of explore those connections and see how they sit with you. Because I know, having spoken to you before about these, that they really resonate with you. This isn't you kind of trying to be eclectic. This is things that you've stumbled across and gone, wow, like that really resonates with me. And suppose, kind of as we were speaking about before, knowing your truth and not being nervous to kind of really understand what that looks like for you in your own individual journey.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we act as sort of guides for others, because actually it comes back to what we were saying about developing a stronger sense, or a more developed sense of the inner, of who we are. That sometimes we can't do that on our own. We need to be with others in order to do that. You know, and this work that I'm describing, this early work, it really works best. You can try and do it on your own, but really it works if you're in attunement with another person who really feels safe, and is ideally experienced, and knows what's going, can read your nervous system, can really, and then some magical things happen, because then you're being with the other. It's that sense of Merleau-Ponty, we're not just embodied beings on our own, we exist in relation to others. That's the whole point. We don't exist in isolation, we're part of a system, a family system, aren't we? Which goes out, as we said, it expands down the ancestral line and expands forward into our future lineage, but also with the people that we encounter day to day.
Yeah, and you make me think here when you're saying it's not just about your ancestors, but about your future and what might come after. And I wonder indeed how much this influences who we are in each moment. Why are we making the actions purely because we're authentically being ourselves in that moment, or is there a lot of focus on the future in a positive way or in a negative way? I think it was really, it made me almost find humor in what you said before about how back in the day, as it were, we just were, because there
Yeah.
was nothing else to do.
There is
We just
nothing
were.
else. Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's almost kind of humorous how we feel and love to advocate like humans are so advanced, we're so, forward, we're so advanced in technology in all of these ways, but actually we're so not advanced in what kind of is the fundamental part of existence, which is just
Yeah,
being. Like,
I
we
think
are
we're
constantly
less advanced,
distracted.
really.
Yeah, I feel like maybe it's all just distractions, and like we have
Mm,
these like fabricated um things that we have to achieve for value, rather than just value being in just being who we are. And
completely. Absolutely. I think it's really, I mean, I just think, sometimes I look at what we're doing to the planet and I think, my God, and I just have these images of, these very wise indigenous souls just looking on, just oh my, really, actually, it's quite horrifying in some ways. And it requires um, it requires a splitting, it requires a denial to live like that, to do what we do to the environment. We have to be disconnected from it. You can't abuse somebody unless you're disconnected from them. And it's the same with the environment. And that's why I think it's so important that anything that brings us, particularly younger people, in connection with nature and with themselves and with others is to be celebrated and promoted.
yeah,
Mm.
because you said earlier, how technology has this amazing capacity to give us wisdom, but you're so right in the sense that all of that information is out there and so accessible and so well available in these day and age, but we do deny that. To be able to live the way that we do, we deny so much. And we turn up, like it's a good imagery, isn't it? We turn off our head away
Mm.
from what we
Yeah,
don't want to see.
yeah, or we see it and we think, well, just because I've seen that and signed a petition, I'm now
Yeah,
somehow absolved.
yeah,
It's a sort of great way of absolving the self, isn't it? Again, not taking responsibility.
yeah,
um,
yeah,
but then I also come back to, actually we're not designed to take on the world and all of its woes. We normally in the past would have only been aware of what was going on in our immediate environment, and I think it comes back to then being aware, but not sort of not getting too caught up in feeling the pain of everything that's going on, because it's overwhelming.
yeah,
We can only do that collectively, we can't take that on individually. So that's why in the last year I've very much been a person that's just, I went through a phase of wanting to know all about COVID and everything that was happening and and then I just decided, right, I'm not going to watch the news. I'm going to keep a running brief on it, just keep an eye on it. But actually, I'd rather just play my oboe, actually, quite frankly. It's no good me trying to become an amateur virologist or epidemiologist. It's not good, what's the point? So actually, I've gone full circle now with it, and it feels much better. Mm.
I love that you've mentioned that, because that is something that I know a lot of people, including myself, really have. It can cause so much suffering when you kind of open your eyes and allow yourself to have that awareness of the suffering that the world and the planet and the humanity and the animals are experiencing. And for many years that really thwarted me, this sense that I must, like, I want the whole world to be different. I want everything to not be in the pain that it is, the unnecessary pain that it is. And it really, really shook me. And I work with people who it really, really,
Mm,
really shakes. And what I've kind of understood, especially even speaking to Yaki, in this interview series, he was speaking about tribes. And I think that is perhaps what I'm noticing, that can be the way to kind of live with this in a way that feels meaningful,
mm,
but without being crushed by the burden of carrying the whole world, is to be compassionate and kind and do your bit for your tribe, for
mm,
whatever that tribe is for you, in whatever way, in whatever your contribution is. Even making music, I mean, it's so profoundly moving and has been a fundamental part of all cultures for for infinity.
mm. Absolutely. And so, I think you're absolutely right, because to take music and the arts as an example, I mean, they're a way of connecting, their way of also um, writing everything, resetting. At the end of the harvest, traditionally, you'd have a big party and you'd play folk music and have a bit of a good time, and it was a release. And I think that's why it's been so upsetting in a way to see that the arts has not been championed, has been really crushed by the last year, that there haven't been the opportunities to play music publicly in groups. But we need that as part of who we are. It's no good us just all being, hooked up digitally with all of that going on if we don't have the arts, because it's fundamental to who we are. I mean, even the earliest caves have paintings on them. It's a form of it's part of the non-verbal traditions, is music and storytelling and all of that. And so anything that promotes connection and being with, sort of that idea of just being around a campfire sort of idea, has got to be celebrated. One of the things I've most enjoyed recently is sitting around a fire pit with my children in the evening. It's fantastic. There's something quite primal about it, just being with the flames, and just sitting around at dusk. It's just fantastic. So completely talking about tribes, I think it's not that far off actually, in terms of the big picture, that we were in that place.
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know it really isn't. And one thing I really noticed when I had my children when they were very small is, immediately, um, all of the mothers I knew in the local area, we were all connecting all the time and meeting up and spending hours just sitting talking with our babies, and it was beautiful. And that's one of the things I most loved about having young children, was that sense of being in a tribe, as it would have been. And one of my dearest friends, we spent literally days, hours just hanging out, when our children were very, very small. And it was beautiful. There's something about that sort of shared experience which brings you together.
It's almost like different scenarios kind of permit you to just be. So
Mm,
having a child, you are allowed to just be. You're allowed to just be with you and with the other, because you're still fitting in with kind of society's view of, right, that's a responsibility, so you're still doing something productive, so that's okay, and you can justify it and they can justify it, and so you can just be. Whereas you're sitting there just chatting with a friend and you haven't got a child, well, should they be
yeah,
doing something,
yeah,
you know?
absolutely. She monetizing that? No. Well, let's just drink that coffee up and get on then.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true. It's a legitimate form of being a mother with a young child. You're allowed to, um, just be with your baby. But even then, there's incredible pressure not to do that, to rush back to work, to put your baby in a nursery, to regiment your child with a routine, and then all the material pressures to do it right. There's one way to do it, and it's this way, and all other ways are invalid. But that again is an exercise in forging one's own path. That you can't be with your baby from an external perspective. You just have to relate with your baby one-on-one.
Forging your own path and listening to your truth, because I can imagine, I don't have children myself, but how you have kind of fads of what is the right thing to do based on whose book has been published and who is being completely spoken. I would imagine.
Yeah, completely. When I had Jamie, my son, Gina Ford was the big thing, and it was this book, and it was all about very, very regimented timetabling of the baby. That you put them down, then they would sleep for this length of time, then you'd get them up and you'd feed them this particular amount of milk, which you'd either expressed or ideally or was formula, but it was measured, and then this was how you went through your day. And actually it's completely disconnected. It means you're not connected with your baby, you're not in a natural rhythm, you're not in flow. And the best thing to do is to just throw that sort of book away and just be with your baby, and just lie on the sofa with the baby, just chill. Babies, but one of the most revelatory things for me when I had my first child was to realize babies couldn't tell the time. Like they can't tell the time, so they're just going with how they feel. They are just being, and actually it's an invitation to go and join them in that dance. Actually, the most attuned mothers are in that symbiotic relationship of feeding and sleeping and being, and it works, and it's beautiful when you see that. It's beautiful.
And I really love that the conversation has flowed to this point, because I realize that what we're saying here is that actually, as soon as we're born into this world, even before we're born into this world, we already know our yes or no. We already know what's right and wrong. We already have our connection with ourselves and our flow. And it's almost that being alive in different communities and societies puts you at risk of having that flow sabotaged or disconnected. And finding healing or finding deep connection or creating an authentic self that really, really feels right on a day-to-day way of living is by kind of unlearning all of these kind of polluting factors of the stuff that's confused us.
Right. Yeah, a lot of it is just unlearning what we've been conditioned to through the educational system and through maybe our family systems or whatever, as coming back to self. Because you're absolutely right, we already know when we're a tiny baby, we know that we're hungry, we know that we're tired, we know that something needs to change, and we verbalize that usually, unless we're in a toxic environment. And so yeah, the yes and no is there, but often we don't consciously know about it. You just go through life thinking, oh, I think I'll do that, I think I'll try this, but we don't actually test it out. Is this me? Is this actually me, or is this someone else influencing me? Is this excuse me, is this friends and family putting pressure on me to do a certain thing, or is this actually because I want to do it? And that's where having that stronger sense of inner knowing is great, because if you have that, you can say, actually, I hear you, but this is what I want. This is what I want to do, and I really trust myself. And that's a big factor, isn't it? It's not just knowing that we have a yes or a no, it's trusting that
and
it's
having
the right
the courage. Having the courage.
Then it leads to that courage.
Because I was walking around the Thames with a friend who's got a 2-3-year-old, and they would just, if they wanted something, they would go for it. And I'm just not so used to spending time with children at this point in my life. I'm just not exposed to this much, but I've always valued it so much, because what I always kind of take away from those situations is that they go after what they want. And of course they're told, like, no, you're not allowed to do that, but they're still at that point where they have the courage to express what they want. And I think about myself and so many other people who know what they want. They damn well know what they need and what they want, but they're way too scared to ask for that. They're so much more comfortable in a kind of paradoxical sense to to go without than to actually just express, this is what I want.
It's true. And you can waste years of your life
Yeah.
in that case, you
Yeah.
know, and people do.
Yeah.
And, you know, actually one of the things for me is, you know, my father having died relatively recently, 2 years ago, is actually a really tangible reality check of actually, you know, this isn't forever. Like, we know that, but it's only when older people, or people our age, but typically older people, you know, do pass on. And there's that sense of, actually, it's made me reflect, am I doing things, what am I doing in my life that I actually don't really want to be doing, or would like to be doing, that I'm not doing, or, you know, do I have any not exactly regrets, but are there any areas in my life where I'm not pursuing something that I would want to be doing? So I don't know, for me it's something like, I always wanted to learn the bassoon. So I hired a bassoon and I started just teaching myself the bassoon, because actually it was something I'd always had in the future as a thing I might do. And I thought, I'd actually be really a bit cross if I got to the end of my life and I hadn't actually done that, even though it's quite a small thing. And it can be a big thing. It could be something like, I've always wanted to go and see, I don't know, the Taj Mahal or whatever. But it's very easy to think, oh, I'll do that next year, or I'll leave that till blah. And actually, there's never really a right time, is there? And it's kind of a cliche, but it's true.
Well, indeed it is, and it's such, you know, temporality or time is such a important and beautiful theme in existential thinking, and it's something that through the exposing myself to existential ideas, it has become a lot more present for me, because we have this amazing capacity to deny the fact that life is finite, and to assume that we have ample time in the future to do everything that we want.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. So
How can you, or how would you say that these ideas, these philosophies that we kind of discussing today can help people that are facing challenges?
um, I think it's sort of, for me, it's about, well, it's what you said. It's that having the courage, understanding and knowing, recognizing that, knowing, bringing that to conscious awareness rather than denying it or suppressing it. But also, there's something for me about um, that awareness that actually you can get through this stuff, whatever it is. That even if we're in the middle of something and it feels appalling and horrific and overwhelming and all of those things, and whatever it might be, and for you know, for Frankel, it was being in a concentration camp. You can't get much worse than that as a lived experience. But there's that sort of sense of an invitation to find the beauty in that, if you can. And some people would be horrified at me for saying that, but there's still, even then, in that sort of circumstance, we still have a choice in how we show up, what our inner world is still ours. Nobody controls our inner world. No one controls exactly what we're thinking. And there's still that chance for us to see a flower or an insect and think, wow, that's beautiful. So I think there's a sort of, there's an invitation there to sort of shift from a place of torment or whatever to a more of a growth mindset of being, in some sense, of having a sense of beauty. And as you say, temporality, that this is not going to be forever. Nothing is going to be forever. It's always shifting and changing. That alone can make anything that feels unbearable more bearable. Yeah. And it fits with me. I'm a strong advocate of mindfulness, not necessarily a mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, more of a sort of Buddhist approach towards that, of the sort of, say, there's a beautiful poem by Rumi that says, well, you know, it talks about the guest house and it says welcome it all, and it's all about, you know, even if it's if it's something awful, still welcome it, be with it. It's not just about being with the nice stuff, it's all of it, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah.
there are so many really beautiful contributions, aren't they? But I would love to hear, what is your contribution, as at least right now, I think temporality in mind,
Mm.
at this moment, because I feel that you're going to bring a lot to this kind of field. At this moment, what's your contribution?
Well, I mean, a lot of my focus at the moment has been around my work, my research around gender. So I feel like that's really important at the moment, is bringing more awareness of, there's so much noise around what do trans people exist, what are they, should they do this, should they not, and actually sitting within that is and are human beings, and they have an inner knowing of who they are and what they want to be and how they want to show up in the world. And I think there's something really important about validating their experience, and being with that, being alongside that in a very tender, open way, so that there's opportunity to explore and experiment, and again, not just be in the black and white of I'm this or I'm that, but I'm all of this, I'm me, and seeing the humanity of the person who's going through this. It's very easy to sit back and judge when one hasn't been through it, and form opinions, particularly as a sort of, if we're in the classic sort of straight heterosexual white privileged, all of that, and I'm definitely in that category, in the sense of I've not had to grow up, I didn't grow up questioning all those parts of me. I was fairly clear on who I was from those perspectives, but then in my research, it's such a conflicted, denied, challenging place to be, when even the most fundamental aspects of who you are or who you think you are not permitted or not validated, or not even possibility, there's no possibility of them being explored, or accepted. It's not a case of, do I want to do, what do I want to do for my degree, or where shall I live? It's more, who am I, at a really fundamental level, and that's been really powerful. So there's some stuff there for me around bringing some more awareness to that lived experience, in the population as a whole, but also for younger people going through that questioning. But then I'm also very interested in the concept of narcissism, because I think that we are living in a real epidemic of that. I think the real pandemic is this sort of concept of splitting from self. This, well, like you said, the dynamic of we're this or that, we can't be all of it or both. We just have to choose our kind of thing and cling to it, which political party you affiliated with, are you supporter of Black Lives Matter or not. It's also sort of delineated, and I think that we're in a time of even the vaccine, unvaccine, the idea of that is still very split, it's divisive, and that has parallels with narcissism, which is a splitting of self. Ultimately, it's a splitting of self. So that's where I'm sort of most interested at the moment. Yeah.
And it's everywhere, that, isn't it, that we not only are we splitting, but people are encouraging others to split, and it makes, I think, I was watching the end of the tennis finals, and someone had obviously just won the men's finals. I'm not sure if you watched it, but the presenter, who is presumably an incredibly celebrated presenter, she asks the winner, who do you want to win the football match? Because it was also the World Cup football match. Who do you want to win? Who do you support? And I thought, what a bizarre question to ask this person, to put sides. Is that the best thing you can ask right now? He's just won Wimbledon, and he's competed against an Italian who is now Italy and England are playing. Like, what a bizarre black and white. Why put someone in the position to force himself into a for or against,
Yeah.
especially in that context? And yeah, it was totally acceptable for that question to be asked, and luckily, well, for me, I thought it was nice that this tennis player kind of uh was confident in himself to not be under the pressure, literally with the world watching, literally with cameras, to answer that question. But I thought it's a really vivid example for me of how normal it is to be expected to box yourself, or to have an opinion, here or yes or no, this or that opinion in this world.
Completely, yeah. And actually I think you've raised a really important point, which is, for me, in the media is responsible for so much of this. They are the driver of this slightly over dramatized, slightly sort of voyeuristic, titillating sort of encouragement of drama and splitting and division, because it's more interesting, it's exciting, isn't it? It's like, oh, are you team Kate or are you team Megan? Actually, that in itself is just so
It's
trite.
disgusting. Yeah,
It
yeah.
really is vile, and I really rile against it. I think it's really toxic. So that's another reason I'm sort of not a proponent of some aspects of the media, because I think they just fuel this.
Yeah.
Absolutely, just for the sake of it, for column inches. And we don't need it. And I think the more people realize they don't actually need it, they don't need it in their lives, the better, actually, because, as you say, fundamentally, we're hardwired to collaborate. We couldn't have done otherwise. When we were a tribe, it was no good being a tribe of one, was it? You didn't get very far. We're hardwired to collaborate and be with others in a very symbiotic way.
I love that we're hardwired to collaborate, and that I think is something I'm going to reflect on a lot lately, because I'm glad you bring up tribes again, because I think we were speaking about how we can contribute to our own tribes, but also it goes beyond that, doesn't it? It allows us, when we're doing that, we can also connect tribes, even whether that is actually physically. Maybe in this way this project might do it, might bring different communities from around the world together, and actually have a obvious kind of communication collaboration. But even just the tribes that exist within our own life and our own self, how we can be involved with so many different areas, and that they can be compatible, that they can collaborate. It doesn't have to be that you are one or another, or that you hang out with only these people, that you educate yourself with only these people.
Yeah, and actually, when you were talking, what came up for me was this idea that, yes, we were hardwired to collaborate within our tribe, but in the past, there was that fear of being attacked, or
Yeah.
being or having to fight for scarce resources and all of that sort of thing. It's a fear-based impulse, and that's our fight or flight system, isn't it? And actually, one of the things that's most damaging at the moment with the pandemic is the fueling of fear, which
Yeah.
leads to division, and it leads to splitting, and it means that we don't trust that person, that, oh, you've not been vaccinated, are you, there's a whole narrative that's being built around that for us, which isn't coming from us. It's coming from the media and from the people who sit behind that. But it's fear-based, and it's very divisive, and it's not collaborative. And actually, we need to overcome that. We need to very much say, actually, I'm not going to buy into that narrative, and we're all part of this together.
And in this sense, kind of how we were saying before, humans have barely evolved at all if you look at the world today.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
We fall into it like that, don't we? It's just a natural thing of just, the minute we're in our fight or flight, everything else goes out the window, and we're more susceptible to that at the moment because there's a perceived threat, an
Yeah.
external threat, and we can't see it. So it's sort of even worse, because it's not a saber-toothed tiger, to use the
Yeah.
classical analogy. It's actually just there, something in the ether we can't see, that can shift and change. I mean, it's the perfect baddie, isn't it, really? So
Yeah.
for me, then, it's an exercise in coming back to self and going, okay, in that classic, I think it's called havening, doing this sort of touching the body and going, is this happening right now, where I am sitting in my room? Am I safe? Well, actually, yes. And no, this isn't happening right now. There's lots of noise, but actually right now it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm just conscious of the time here, Annie. Before we come to the close of our interview, I would really love for you to give anyone listening kind of, we've spoken about your influence of music, and I'm wondering, someone that
Yeah.
might be interested in exploring these philosophical ideas, how
Mm.
can they go about that, either, you know, with books, but also any other avenues that can lead us to have this opportunity to explore existentialism?
So what, from a musical perspective, just
Or
getting more.
from another way I can phrase it is like, what has been influential for you on this journey?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I love all music, but there's some music which really is very heart-based, heart-centered, and so I would invite anybody to just sort of almost embark on a sort of journey through some of the classics, like Lark Ascending. Vaughan Williams' Lark Ascending is absolutely beautiful. The Elgar Cello Concerto. Some of those pieces are very accessible and they're beautiful. There are all sorts of pieces that you can find, but some of the cool music that's out there is incredible too. It has to just really what resonates, but I think there's something about particular pieces of music which are quite, they invoke a feeling, a sort of, they sort of expand the heart, and you know when you've heard them, you just know, because they're just so beautiful. They're sort of transcendental, and they sort of bridge that gap between humanity and the sort of the wider sort of the spiritual sense of who we are. There's a sort of like, even with art, this idea that true art, true music is a sort of, there's a sort of genius about it that's sort of somehow come from somewhere else that isn't just human. It's something else. It's sort of something, a spark, some specialness about it. And for me, those pieces of music particularly evoke that. And then, you know, in terms of elsewhere, how we can connect with it, I would just say go outside and just spend some time in, you know, go and look at some trees, go and walk in a wood, take your shoes off and walk barefoot somewhere, you know. Actually take the time to look at your child if you have one, and really look in their eyes, actually look into their eyes properly, rather than just, would you like a yogurt or something. Actually connect with them, spend some time, you know. Those are the things which really, hang around some animals, you know. Animals always know, they always know. Just touch their fur and hang out with them and look them in the eyes and just stroke them, and maybe go for a walk with a dog or something like that. It's just so powerful. And so those are the sort of everyday. I think sometimes it becomes this sort of, it can be, oh, you have to read this book, or you have to do this course, or whatever, that there's this sort of formula. But actually it's all accessible right now, just here. It's just we can do it now. We could do it right now as we're talking. So I think that's really what I would say.
It's so beautiful, and I can totally see that it's perhaps like a less conventional way to say, you know, explore existential ideas by going for a barefoot walk, or by looking your child in the eye, or by stroking and feeling the fur of an animal. But I guess in a sense it's actually profoundly authentic, in a profoundly authentic way to explore existential philosophies, because the philosophies are so rooted in being, and there is nothing more truthful about being than feeling and sensing and actually
Yeah,
experiencing the world.
completely right. It evokes all the senses. So I think the more that we can bring online all of our senses to be, the more powerful. So, you know, cooking some beautiful food, smelling or tasting something incredible, eating some incredible food with other people. These are all ways of being in the moment, being in the now. And that's really what we do in client work, isn't it? Is look at people and say, how present are you? Are you living in the past? Are you fearful of the future, what's weighing you down that needs to be integrated or you to be released from, or whatever, so that we can be more present and more embodied. That's what it's all about.
We haven't really touched on the absurd today, but there has been, I feel like, an underlying message of how in many ways it is so absurd that we kind of convince ourselves that things are wrong, or that things need to change, or that this or that, and actually in this moment we are we
Yeah,
are we are being, we are living, we are existing, and actually that is what it is. That is life. Always
that's
we are
there
doing
is.
what we should be doing.
Completely, and it's sort of if you can relax into that, it's very beautiful. It's hard to do, and I find it very difficult sometimes, but it's actually, this is all there is, actually.
Yeah.
This moment that you and I are sharing right now, that's all that really exists for us right now, moment by moment. And I think that's really beautiful. And it's very freeing, because it starts that process of saying, that thing that happened that I didn't really like a few years ago, whatever, actually it doesn't exist now. It's the start of separating and releasing that and freeing oneself up. All that thing I'm scared of, that I'm terrified of happening, is a projection. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, and I therefore have choice over my future. How liberating is that?
Beautiful, beautiful way to end this interview. Do you have anything else, Annie, that you would like to add before we say goodbye?
um I don't think so. I just think I would just say, go and listen to music. Go and listen to more music. Be with things that bring you joy. That's really, for me, that's the essence of existentialism, really. Yeah.
Annie, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. I'm so grateful for you sharing your time and your insights, and to kind of give a really, really tangible and vivid and example of how to experience the world, and how to face challenges, even profoundly painful, life-changing challenges, in a way that is true to yourself, and in an optimistic, hopeful way. Thank you so much, Annie.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. It's been a complete honor, and I've absolutely loved it.
Thank you so much. Take care, Annie. We'll speak
Thank
soon.
you too.